The saw barely finishes its cut before the tree starts to lean. Fall of 1923. A stand of old-growth Douglas fir. A faller kills the engine, drops back, and runs straight down the skid trail, exactly the way he was taught his first week in these woods. The tree comes down clean, right where he aimed it. 30 feet of open ground between him and the stump by the time it hits. He should have walked away from that one. He didn't. And it wasn't the tree he'd just spent 20 minutes cutting that got him. Hold on to that, because the answer isn't the one you're picturing right now, and it's the same answer that's been getting timbermen killed ever since somebody decided the whole rule was just get clear of the tree. I've stood at enough of these sites since to know how the story usually gets written up afterward. Somebody always blames the tree. Everybody was watching. It's never the tree that actually did it. The rule. Here's why that rule sounds complete in the first place. A faller cuts an undercut low on the face, a back cut behind it, leaves a strip of live wood called the hinge to steer the fall. He calls his warning, drops the saw, runs. Every eye on that hillside locks onto the one tree making all the noise, and watching it go down clean feels like the whole job finished. It feels like proof. And a rule that's never failed, you doesn't feel like half a rule. It feels like the whole thing. A green hand watches an old hand drop 100 trees clean, run clear 100 times, walk away fine 100 times, and the lesson that sticks is the short one. Get clear. Live. Nobody tells him the old hand also never once had a widowmaker waiting in the crown next door. The rule worked because the danger never showed up to test it, not because the rule was actually finished. It was about to get tested. Most trades have a rule like this somewhere in them, the kind that gets repeated so often nobody stops to check if it's the whole story. In timber country, it gets passed down the same way everything else does out there. Mouth to mouth, crew to crew, one man showing the next man how it's done, and neither one of them writing anything down. That's not a knock on how they worked. It's just how the gap opens up. A rule survives because it keeps working, and it keeps working because the men repeating it kept getting lucky in the same way, over and over, without ever knowing that's what the luck was. I've seen a man get credited with good judgment for something that was plainly luck more than once, and nobody ever corrects it until it's too late to matter. The kick. There's a second thing that rule leaves out, one most people have never heard of. The tree you cut doesn't always stay finished with you. Sometimes the trunk splits straight up through the hinge before it's even off the stump. A thing the old fallers called a barber chair. And when it happens, the whole butt end kicks backward and sideways with more force than a man can outrun. A straight line back, the exact line the rule tells him to run, can put him directly in the path of a kick he never saw coming. You'd think there'd be a warning. There usually isn't. Rot hidden in the heartwood, a lean already fighting the hinge, wood so tight-grained it splits instead of bending. None of it shows from the ground. A tree can look sound as a church bell right up until the back cut lets go. Crews that have seen it happen describe the same thing every time. No crack, no lean, no half-second of grace. One moment the hinge is holding, and the next the whole stump end is coming around like a door slamming, faster than a man can adjust his feet, even if he sees it starting. It's part of why the old hands never fully trusted a straight retreat, even on a tree that looked clean in every way a green hand would know to check for. That's still not what killed the man in 1923. It's worse than that. The widowmaker. That tree never grew alone. It stood shoulder to shoulder with 100 others, And every one of those neighbors is carrying dead weight up in its crown that nobody on the ground can see. Snapped limbs hung in the branches, whole broken tops that gave way years back and never finished falling. The old hands had a name for it, and once you hear it, you won't look up into big timber the same way again. A widowmaker. Ever wonder why the ground shakes the way it does when a big tree lands? That shake doesn't stop politely at the stump. It runs through the roots of every tree touching that same ground for 80 feet in every direction, and it shakes loose exactly the kind of dead wood that's been waiting up there for years. A widowmaker doesn't crack or lean or give you a second to react the way a falling tree does. It just lets go, fast and silent, onto whatever's standing underneath, which is very often the exact spot a man ran to, certain he'd gotten clear. That's what got him. 40 feet off from the stump, in a limb that had been dead for 11 years, on ground he'd have sworn was safe. His crew logged it as bad luck the next morning and went right back to running the same straight line the day after that. Nobody changed a thing, because as far as any of them knew, it could have happened to anybody, and it meant nothing about how they'd been taught to work. Logging still tops the list of the most dangerous jobs in the country, has, for longer than most of the men doing it, have been alive, ahead of fishing boats, ahead of roofing. Bears never earned that reputation. The widowmaker did quietly, without ever making the papers. The old escape. The fallers who lived long enough to grow old in this trade knew the part the rule skipped. Before the first cut ever touched bark, they walked their retreat first, 2 paths angled roughly 45 degrees off the direction that tree was going to fall, never straight back, never in line with where a kick could reach. They cleared the brush out of both paths ahead of time, because a man tripping mid-run doesn't get a second try. And once the hinge let go, they didn't stand there watching their own work. They moved immediately, eyes up on the canopy instead of locked on the trunk, watching for exactly the kind of loose timber a hard landing was about to shake free. It started even earlier than that, really. A faller worth his pay walked a slow circle around every tree he meant to drop, head tilted back, reading the crown of that tree and every tree close enough to touch it. If he didn't like what he saw hanging up there, he dropped a different tree first. No hinge cut, however clean, was going to fix a problem sitting 80 feet over his head. Away was never the whole rule. Away and up was. I still walk that same 45-degree line out of habit on ground. I've cut 100 times before, because the day you stop is usually the day it matters. None of it took extra gear or special training that cost anybody money. It cost time, a few minutes before the saw ever started, and a habit of looking somewhere other than straight ahead. That's usually the cheapest fix in any dangerous trade, and it's usually the one that gets skipped first when a crew's behind schedule and the light's going. The fade. That kind of knowing only survives as long as it keeps getting used, and the chainsaw changed how often it got used. The misery whip gave way to the chainsaw gave way to feller bunchers and hydraulic processors, and a steel cab put plenty of modern operators behind glass their grandfathers never had. Professional crews mostly still get taught the old rule because the job insists on it. But somewhere else, right now, this week, the myth is doing exactly what it did in 1923. It's the guy with a chainsaw from the hardware store dropping a leaning oak in his own backyard who's heard exactly one rule his whole life: get clear of the tree, and has never once heard the word widowmaker. Backyard tree work still kills hobbyists and trained arborists every year for that same tired reason. They got clear of the tree they could see and never thought to look for the one they couldn't. Even some small tree service crews skip this part now, not out of carelessness exactly, just because a customer paying by the job doesn't want to watch a man stand in the yard for 10 minutes staring up at somebody else's trees before he ever touches his saw. The equipment got safer. The forest stayed exactly as dangerous as it's always been. That faller in the Cascades did everything the rulebook told him to do, and the rulebook was wrong about what safety actually required. It wasn't a lie exactly. It was a rule that stopped one step too soon, dressed up neat enough that nobody thought to ask what came after it. I've carried half-finished rules like that myself more than once, and never known it until something proved them wrong. If you ever do pick up a saw at your own place, carry the whole rule, not just the half everybody knows. 2 paths, angled, never straight back. Eyes up once that tree starts going, not locked on the trunk, because the ground shaking under your boots is often just the start of it, not the end. So tell me down in the comments, what's a rule from your own line of work that turned out to only be half true? I'd bet money every trade has one. And if you want the next one of these pulled up before it disappears for good, stick around and subscribe, because there's a lot more of this old knowing still buried out there.